by Riverside.
Everyone, welcome to Leadership Bytes podcast, where we dive into the inspiring stories and wisdom of current and emerging women leaders from diverse backgrounds, industries, and career stages. I am so pleased today to welcome Samantha Rosenberg to the podcast. Samantha has over 2 decades of human resources experience in nonprofit and for-profit sectors and currently serves as the Chief People and Governance Officer at the Association for Diagnostics and Laboratory Medicine in Washington, D.C. She's actively involved with the American Society of Association Executives, holding roles as Vice Chair of the Workforce Development Advisory Task Force, and she's also a member of the Finance and Business Operations Professionals Advisory Council. Samantha continues to serve as a board member of the DC Society of Human Resource Management, or DC SHRM for short. And she holds her Bachelor of Arts in International Affairs from the George Washington University, is a certified association executive, and holds certifications as a senior professional in human resources and a SHRM senior certified professional. We're so excited to welcome this highly credentialed human resources executive to the podcast today, where we're going to talk about leadership, but we're also going to focus a bit on a popular topic that lots of you are interested in, which is workforce development, and even talk about career trajectories and advancing your career. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here.
Thank you. I'm very curious about what inspired you to pursue a career in HR and how your journey led to your current leadership role as a Chief People and Governance Officer.
That's a really good question. Very few people, at least 20 plus years ago, woke up and said, I want to work in human resources. Most people didn't even know human resources existed. It was a back office, somewhere in the basement that people worked in and you got paid from. So I, like a lot of other people, kind of fell into it. First job out of college, I had great internship opportunities while I was in college and part-time jobs. So I worked for a very large organization as an intern in their HR department for a semester, which was really great experience, and got to see a little bit of HR. And then I had a part-time job working for an executive search firm, which I had no idea was a thing at the time, but worked there for about a year and a half in college, maybe close to 50% time. Learned about recruiting and connecting people and making connections. And from there, went to work in recruiting. It was a natural place to go for another large and becoming larger organization here in the DC area. And that was my for-profit experience. And from there, stayed within recruiting, went back to the executive search firm for a while. And then while I enjoyed recruiting, I didn't want it to be my entire day. I wanted to do more. And so I looked to branch out into HR because it's really, at the end of the day, it's a business department, part of the business of an organization. It's something that is necessary for all organizations to have, even in a small way. It allowed me to expand my portfolio and my experience outside of just recruiting and have a real impact with people.
Yeah. And I want to bust some myths about HR, because all of us have worked for organizations and wondered, is HR there for the organization? Is HR there for the employee? Can you trust HR? What's your perspective on that?
Such an amazing question. Actually had a conversation just this afternoon with a young professional who recently graduated and was interested in HR, and I brought this topic up. HR is the tightrope role within an organization. You are representing the employee, but you're also representing the organization. And at the end of the day, my goal is to be fair. Have I been fair to the employee and have I been fair to the organization? Yes, I need to protect the organization. There are compliance things I need to do, but I also want to make sure that we are doing right by our staff and that we are treating people properly. They are getting what they need out of the work environment. They are growing, they are learning, they are being valued, because all of those things makes the organization as a whole better as well. So it's a tightrope, but I think there's a way to do it. People who come into my office sometimes wonder if it's a safe space, and my response to them is yes, but, or yes, and. And it depends on what you're going to tell me. There are certain things that I can keep private, and there's certain things that I'm just going to have to share because it's a legal issue or a compliance issue, and I can't keep it confidential for those reasons.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you for that. And I'm really also curious about how, as the HR lead for your organization, how you navigate that balance between advocacy for the employee and also organizational objectives, particularly as a leader in times of change or transformation.
It goes back to, have we been fair? Have we looked at everybody, everything? Have we considered all different manners of thought and all different manners of opinion? And at the end of the day, are we being fair to everybody? Being in a nonprofit obviously is a little bit different. People don't typically join nonprofits to get rich. So it's a different environment. People make choices that are different for their personal lives when joining a nonprofit. So my experience is a little bit different than that in those terms. But I think that I always want to make sure that we have been fair to everybody, recognizing that at the end of the day, a nonprofit or not, it's still a business that needs to have financial resources available to keep the doors open the next day. Sometimes there are situations that happen that are unavoidable. And again, have we been fair to everybody in that circumstance?
Yeah, that's a fair answer. I love it. I love it. And thinking about future leaders, whether it's HR or some other field, is there any advice that you have? And this show focuses on women, so I'm going to say to future and aspiring women leaders who are looking to move toward a leadership trajectory. What should they be doing in preparation to try to advance into leadership?
I'm a big believer in professional development. I'm a big believer in networking. And I think those two things are incredibly important. You read off my various credentials. I obviously believe that certifications are important. I think it shows your body of knowledge, but also your desire to continue to learn and grow, which I think is really important. Making connections and staying connected to people is also really valuable. I've also learned over time that you have to make the uncomfortable ask. Nobody knows what you want to do unless you tell them.
That's good. What I'm hearing you say is that you have to be an advocate for yourself. Awesome. So, in conversations around workforce, there have been lots of emphasis on the importance of soft skills. We keep hearing about how AI is becoming so prevalent and technology is going to have an ever increasing role in workforce. So that's going to make people who have better soft skills more in demand. What do you think are some of the essential soft skills that people need to be working on sharpening right now if they're going to remain marketable in the workforce, regardless of what industry they're in?
The ability to have a conversation, the ability to talk to another person, even through Zoom, but the ability to communicate one-on-one or in a group. Presentation skills are still going to remain very important. Networking skills. You can't do all of that behind a computer all the time. You need to be able to communicate with others outside of email, outside of instant message, outside of text messages.
That's great advice and very true. It's amazing how technology has shifted the way that we communicate. It's interesting. I was watching a news show a couple of months ago, and they were had an infographic up on the screen where they were showing the number of employers who were talking about how many job candidates were bringing their parent on interviews, or they were having interviews on Zoom and not wanting to turn on their cameras or things like that. And so, yeah, those interpersonal skills are really super important. I completely agree with you there. And so we are in a tightening labor market. What are you seeing in terms of shifts? Is it harder to hire right now, or is it harder for people to get jobs?
From what I'm seeing, the junior entry level jobs are more difficult to get as the labor market has started to shift and there are not as many jobs out there. I think it's the entry level positions that are the hardest for people to find, or organizations are not opening up those positions as much.
That makes sense. And we're just seeing so many shifts on different levels within organizations. And one of the things that we've seen lately that has been disconcerting has been some of the shifts that are happening right now around DEI. There's been some organizations who have doubled down on it and have said this is very important to us. We're going to stay the course. And then there are others who, because of increasing pressure from external forces, they've decided that they're going to back off of it a little bit. Do you think that DEI is still really something that's necessary for organizations to center? And if so, can you give us an example of at your organization how you all are keeping it at the forefront of what you do?
So we continue to work on DEI at my organization. In fact, on Thursday, we have an annual training that we have an external trainer coming in. She's doing a session on microaggressions, which I'm really excited about. It's a new session. I haven't seen it yet. And what we're hoping that is going to happen with that is it's going to be centered really about how people can utilize it, not only for their personal life, but also for the workplace. And use examples that are not just workplace related, but also potentially customer member related.
Yeah, I love that.
But yeah,
Walking the talk. I think that's so important because there are lots of organizations that are saying things, but I love to hear about organizations that are actually sticking to the commitment and doing those things.
we have to. I don't think we can ignore it. It's still an issue that's out there. And while I recognize the language around it might be changing in certain places, I don't think it's changing everywhere. And I think pendulums tend to shift back and forth in different ways. But at the end of the day, I think it's something that's really important and something that organizations continue to see the value in.
Yeah, that's that very good point. What do you think that women need to be centering during this time if they're going to grow in leadership? Are there things that you look at and say, we as women have got to master this particular area? Or do you think it's just the same across the board for all leaders?
Women, myself included, need to get past the uncomfortable conversations and the uncomfortable acts. The statistic is still out there that women tend to ensure they can tick every single box in a qualification on a job ad, whereas men will still apply when they only can tick 75% of those boxes.
Yeah.
And I think that's right. I think as women are much more cautious or don't necessarily want to put ourselves out there, but I think we need to. I think we need to be more forthcoming and be willing to fail, right? A lot of times we've put ourselves in these places where we can't fail or we don't want to show insecurity. And I think we need to show a little bit more of that. And I hope the last 4 years helped us a little bit. I think during COVID, people saw that there was not just this work persona, we had this full life, and we've been able to bring a little bit more of that to work.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was one positive that came out of the pandemic. We began to feel more at home with our coworkers and have more collegial relationships. I definitely agree with you there. And staying in that same vein, the workplace has really evolved since the start of the pandemic. with remote and hybrid work becoming the norm. As a leader, how do you keep your workforce connected when sometimes people are not physically in the same location? And if they are, sometimes they're only there a couple of days a week.
That is the $1,000,000 question. I think each organization has to figure out what works best for them, but it's back to the personal connections and it's the forcing each other to hop on a Zoom call, not just rely on email or instant message. It's always scary when HR just pings you and says, "Hey." But so I usually start every conversation with, "You're not in trouble."
Love it. Yeah.
But I think instead of an email, can I give somebody a call and can I make that personal connection? And then also making the time that we're together really valuable. So, for instance, next week at my organization, we are having our 3-day staff retreat, and it's a mixture of work meetings and fun events and time eating and enjoying each other, but making it meaningful. We have also been really successful by hosting lunch and learns around the organization about work the organization is doing that people really like. So it connects people to each other, but then also to the work that people are doing, which has been great. I started a weekly coffee break virtually during the pandemic and while everybody was at home, and I've kept it going. I won't lie, it's a small cohort of people who come, but for the ones who come, it's been fantastic. And I always say it's the ones who want to come who need to come, right? It's serving a value for them in some way, and it serves a value for me and for the organization. And I've got to know people in ways I would have otherwise never known them. And it's been really, really meaningful and valuable, I think.
That's awesome advice and some really creative ways to stay connected there. I love that. The multi-day staff retreat, that's a very cool idea. Samantha, some of the people that are listening to this right now are in roles where they are not at the upper echelon, if you will, of leadership just yet in their organization. What would be your advice to people who are wanting to move from individual contributor roles or entry to mid-level manager roles into leadership? Are there things that they need to watch out for or get better at in order to be seen as a leader in their organization?
I think there's a level of executive presence, but I also think there's just a level of people who are able to get things done, people who are able to be strategic in their thinking and think outside the box. And I think that's really important. Not just looking at their one area, but how does this affect the entire organization? Or how can I look at things more broadly? I somewhat recently had somebody mention the idea that when you're a leader of an organization, you have to take yourself out of the department and really look at yourself as now your department is the entire organization. You're now part of this leadership team versus the leader of a group. And I really like that.
Yeah.
And that's hard to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. So, what is your approach in your current role as the Chief People and Governance Officer? I imagine you're dealing with challenges all the time, probably. What is your approach to strategic thinking and problem solving?
Yeah, I think it's being open to learning and recognizing that you're going to make mistakes along the way,
Yeah.
but also responding immediately. And that's something that I work on and I continue to work on because my initial thought is I need to respond to this immediately. I need to provide a response. I need to come up with it right now. A lot of times it's much better to take a step back, give yourself some space, and then return to the situation or return to the issue and really think about it more. Everybody comes in with their expertise. And so you look at things through the lens of your own expertise, but you need to be open to listening to other people's expertise and what that lens is.
Yeah, that willingness to listen to others and collaboration is so important. Great advice there. And Samantha, you've been offering some really wonderful advice and wisdom on the topic of workforce and leadership. Now, I'm going to pivot a little bit and ask you about employee well-being for professionals out there who are listening and wanting to get better at this and hear your perspective. What do you see as the role that HR departments should be playing in promoting mental health and work life balance or work life integration?
I believe that HR needs to play a role in it. I think we do it by practicing it ourselves. We need to be able to emulate those things and show that we are able to go on vacation. We are able to go pick up our kids from school or attend that soccer game and do those things. I also believe in providing benefits. We offer Headspace, which people I think appreciate, even if they don't use it all the time. They like having it. Some people are really into meditation, some people aren't, but meeting people where they are, and then also working with employees on what they need and making sure that they know work is work, but your health is much more important and your family is more important and the work is always going to be here. So how can we help you get what you need so that way you can come back?
That's great advice. And hoping all the organization heads out there who are listening to this are taking notes on that. It's so important. And I'm really curious, Samantha, is there a situation or a challenge that you've had, personal or professional, that shaped your perspective on leadership? And if so, how do you think it has impacted you and continues to shape you as a leader?
I haven't had one particular situation or event.
Yeah.
I've been very fortunate to work for some incredible leaders
Yeah.
who have turned into mentors and friends.
Yeah.
And that has helped shape my ability to be a leader.
What were the things that you most admired about those people?
Their willingness to teach, their willingness to listen, their willingness to push me, and sometimes shove me if I needed it. But I think we all need to have that support from somebody.
Yeah.
And a lot of us get it from home, but it's not the same as when we have that mentor who's able to really provide it at work.
Do you think that mentorship should evolve in the workplace? For example, for young professionals who are listening and might be saying, well, I don't have a mentor. Like, how do I go about getting a mentor? What's your advice there?
So for smaller organizations, it's really difficult to provide formal mentorship programs because there's just not enough people to do it and match mentors with. I have seen I've seen professional societies have mentorship programs. SHRM, for instance, does a mentorship program for its members, which is really valuable. I've seen it at the national level. I've actually even seen it at local levels. And so there is opportunities to get that formal mentorship that way. But I think a lot of mentorship is really organic and informal. And sometimes you have a mentor and you don't even realize that they are mentoring you until much later on.
Yeah, that is amazing. Wow. Imagine being such a good mentor that somebody doesn't even realize you're doing it. Great advice there. And I'm going to pivot a little bit and talk about things that are happening right now in society. Right now, we have a woman of color who is running for president. And regardless of political views or parties or all that, what do you think the fact that we have a woman of color running for president means for women's leadership? What does it have the potential to mean for the future of leaders in this country who are women?
I think it's fantastic. Not about the current political situation, but Alex Morgan just announced her retirement yesterday. And she, in her retirement announcement, she mentioned that her 4-year-old daughter looked at her and said, Mommy, I want to be a soccer player. And that didn't exist when Alex Morgan was a child, right?
Yeah.
So having these women take these roles, it creates a pathway that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
So by having a woman of color potentially become our next president, that's a pathway that we haven't reached yet. And I think that will be incredibly impactful and meaningful for women in the future.
Yeah. You have a daughter. What do you want the future to look like for her?
I want a place where there's no barrier. And I think our young people are really working on that. They see the world very differently. They care a lot more about the type of organization they're going to work for. They want to do work that is meaningful for them. But it's looking at the world through fresh eyes. And I think there is so much that is going on in the world that could be scary, where we could just bury our heads and ignore it. And I think our young people are coming up and saying, no, we're going to take it and we're going to lead it and we're going to change it. And I think they will.
Yeah, I think the future is in good hands with the next generation. They are a lot more comfortable with being vocal about their needs and their wants and their expectations. It is something to admire. It's awesome.
It's going to be a challenge in the workplace, but
Yeah.
yes.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness. I'm glad you brought that up because we cannot not talk about that. I have said this so many times, it feels like I'm on autopilot when I say it, but we're in such a unique period in time, right? We have 5 generations that are in the workforce right now at the same time. From Gen Z to the silent generation, everybody's working and trying to navigate and make it come together. We hear a lot about the challenges, but what do you think some of the opportunities are?
I think if people are willing to work together and speak with each other and have those conversations, I think there's a lot of opportunity for everybody to learn. I think each generation has its own work style and expectations. And I won't lie, I'm a Gen Xer. I come from a more traditional workplace type structure. So, not to say that there is a requirement to go the rank, but you do need to spend the time learning and listening and taking the time to become really proficient and an expert in the work that you're doing before you can take that next step. I think patience comes over time. Some of the younger generation want it much faster than some of the older ones of us are comfortable with, maybe. But I think we're getting better in recognizing that. I think we are getting better in trying to provide opportunities. But I think there also has to be a recognition that opportunities can't just be made up. They don't just come from nowhere. So there has to be something real there for an opportunity. And some smaller organizations are just not going to have those opportunities because they're just too small. Larger organizations are much more equipped to do that. They have much easier career ladders and career paths that are more lockstep, that have intervals where you can make those leaps. When you work for a small organization, you work for a nonprofit, your career path is a little bit different. You have to make it yourself. Nobody's going to come and tell you, okay, you've been here 2 years, it's now time to promote you to X. It's much more skill-based. It's much more, these are the skills I want to gain out of this position. This is the knowledge I want to have. And I'm either going to stay here and move into the next level because there's an opportunity to do that, or I'm going to have to leave and find an opportunity somewhere else where I can take this skill set and learn something new there. And that's okay.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that. It's okay to decide that there's a different path for you. And I think that's something important for everybody in the workforce, but particularly the younger generation to understand. We are living in a different time, and it's very rare that you see people maybe from Gen X on down to Gen Z, that you see people staying at a job for 30 years or 40 years now, like it was when my parents were at their jobs. I remember, when I would move around in jobs, my parents would be so worried. And I'm like, things have changed. And, you do have to be open to making pivots in order to gain the skills that you want to gain and to get the experience that you want to get. One of the things I was sharing with my mom, and she was saying, why do younger generations move around? And I said to her that I think it has a lot to do with the fact that back in the day, they had incentives to stay. Do you think that the dissolution of pension systems has played a part in the evolution of the workforce and how long people stay in organizations?
That's a really good question. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, that was just my thought because yes, we do 403Bs and 401Ks and we get matching at a certain level. Pension a little bit different. It's a little bit different. And you're not necessarily having to put your money in there and things like that. So yeah, that was an amazing benefit, I guess.
And you still see that in academia, I think, in some places.
Yeah, and I think maybe government too, I think. Yeah, there's still some of that. But yeah, it's That'd be an interesting study for somebody to undertake. Maybe someone that has somewhere out there, but I've always been curious about the motivations for some of these changes that we see in the trends now.
I think there was a very different social contract between employees and employers in prior generations than there is now.
Ooh, expand. Love that.
You could spend your career General Electric back in the day. I mean, long time ago. And you knew that the organization would have a job for you. Or General Motors. That contract doesn't exist anymore. There's no more guarantees. We hear organizations having layoffs and having financial issues that cause layoffs and needing to focus on stock price and their bottom line in very different ways than previous generations experienced.
Yeah.
And I think that has changed the relationship between employees and employers.
That's a really good thought. Listeners, Samantha and I can talk all things workforce all the time, all day. But I know our time is limited. So I just want to ask you, what do you see as trends in the workforce that both current and emerging leaders need to be thinking about in terms of career pathing and developing their own goals moving forward? Are there trends that you see emerging that people should be concerned about or thinking about?
I think there's been a larger emergence of certifications and micro-credentialing and having specific knowledge skill set that is important. And I think people need to look at those. I think those are things that will be important moving forward, whether it be getting a PMP, the project management certification, or being a CAE, being a CPA. I think those are all important because it elevates your resume to the top. It elevates you as a professional within your field. So I think that is emerging more. And I think now we used to look at these large certifications, and now there's a lot more discussion around micro learning and micro credentialing that exists.
Really good insights there. As we prepare to close, are there any thoughts that you have right now around leadership or things that women leaders should be thinking of?
Take the risk and ask the question, because the answer can't be yes if you don't ask it.
Oh, that's really good. That's a perfect place to hit the pause button. You have given us so much to think about. Thank you for pouring out your wisdom and insights into workforce, career development, and leadership, and all the things. She is definitely someone to watch, folks, on this workforce trajectory. I know she's going to be doing great things, and I expect to hear her voice even more as a leader in the field. So thank you so much, Samantha, for giving us just a little bit of your time today.
Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to continue to work with you as well.
Thank you. All right. Thanks, everyone.